The New Mexico sun blazed like a forge, bleaching the prairie until every mesquite and thorn bush looked carved from bone. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Dust bit the air. Nothing stirred except a lone crow wheeling over the empty wagon track that ran north toward a scatter of tired ranch shacks. Down that road walked a woman. Nearly 8 feet tall, she loomed like a shadow from legend, broad-shouldered. Her skin traced with half-healed cuts. Her dress hung crooked where it had ripped across one shoulder, dark bruises showing through. A strip of cloth bound her ribs, hiding a wound still angry, though no longer fresh. Each step was measured and wary, the gait of someone who still felt hunters at her back. Her name was Wachiwi Sky. She came from the Red Hawk clan, a proud Apache band broken weeks ago by gunfire near the river. She had fled east when soldiers scattered her kin, walking until her moccasins fell apart and the desert split the skin of her feet. Hunger had driven her to chew raw, prickly pear and drink bamsimiite muddy creek water. More than once, she had laughed sharp and bitter at the thought that she mocked even by her own people for being too tall, too strange, might be the last of them still breathing. Survival was all she carried now, and even that felt uncertain. Fear rode beneath her calm face, fear of federal marshals sweeping back across the flats, fear of settlers who might see her as prey, fear that her own immense body was more curse than blessing. Ahead, a single man worked a corral. He swung a hammer with steady rhythm, driving fence posts into the hard pan. When the sound of her boots on gravel reached him, he straightened and rested the hammer on a rail. He didn't grab a rifle. He didn't shout. That calm unsettled her more than anger could. His name was Boone Carver. Years of drifting and loss had chiseled deep lines into his face. He'd been a Texas ranch hand, then a trail rider on a drive gone bad. Long ago, he buried a wife and child, Nora Boone and little June Boone, after a raid. Since then, he'd settled on this lonely patch of land, not to build a fine spread, but to keep hold of the few pieces of life he had left. Wachiwi slowed. Her throat ached for water, yet pride and caution held her back. Boone studied her, the towering figure, the hidden wound, the way her hand hovered near a knife, but never drew. At last he reached for the canteen on a fence post and held it out. "Water," she said, her voice rough as gravel. He gave a single nod. She drank, keenly aware of how desperate she must look. Handing it back, she watched him tighten the cap with unhurried care. His eyes carried no judgment, only the quiet measure of a man deciding if another soul meant danger. "There's beans on the fire," he said at last, voice low and even. "Shade by the shack if you need it." He never asked her name or why she had come. That simple choice meant more than he knew. For weeks, every settler she'd met had demanded answers where she was headed, whether she was a threat. This man asked nothing. It both unsettled and strangely eased her. She lingered, weighing her chances. One man, no rifle in reach. If he turned violent, she could drop him. Yet something in his plain offer rang true. Her legs trembled from too many days on too little food. Pride urged her to keep walking. Hunger told her to stay. Hunger won. By late afternoon, wood smoke and the smell of beans drifted on the breeze. She sat on a stump by his fire while Boone filled a tin bowl and passed it to her without meeting her eyes. She ate slowly, hiding her desperation warmth creeping back into her limbs. Boone worked on the corral, each swing of his hammer precise. Nothing wasted. As dusk fell, he finally spoke. "There's space inside. Bed's rough, but better than dirt. I'll take the porch." Wachiwi hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse to prove she needed no one. but weariness pressed like stone on her shoulders. She nodded and followed his gesture. That night she lay on the narrow bunk, staring at the soft lamplight on the boards. Her mind churned. Would he betray her if soldiers rode past? Would her own people call her weak for leaning on a white man? From the porch came the steady rhythm of Boone's breathing through the thin door. Against her will, that sound quieted the storm inside. For the first time in many nights, Wachiwi Sky slept, without jolting awake at every whisper of wind. Dawn's first pale light slid between the warped boards, striping the floor like silver. Wachiwi Sky woke with a start on the rough wooden bunk, her back stiff, and her ribs throbbing where the old wound tugged. For a heartbeat, she forgot where she was. Her hand flew to the knife at her side, habit born of too many nights on the run, until the steady thump of a hammer outside reminded her the cowboy Boone Carver, the shack, the food. She let out a slow breath and sat up, listening. The room was small and spare. One crooked chair, a table with a short leg, a narrow shelf lined with tin plates and a blackened pot, and a rifle leaning casually against the wall. She noticed the rifle most of all. Boone had left it inside while he worked unarmed. That choice mattered. A man who feared her wouldn't leave his weapon within easy reach. Outside, Boone's hammer fell in deliberate rhythm. She stepped into the hard morning light. He looked up without surprise. His bedroll was already folded coffee water set to boil a saddle blanket laid out for oiling. His gaze slid briefly to the bandage around her ribs, then back to his work. That quiet respect, neither staring nor turning away, unsettled and steadied her at once. "You ought to let me see that cut," he said, nodding toward her side. His voice held no command, only calm suggestion. Her first instinct was to refuse. For days, she had tightened the cloth herself, gritting through pain, letting no one close. Showing weakness had always meant danger. Yet the wound burned hotter now. Infection could finish what bullets hadn't. She lowered herself onto a stump by the fire, slowly loosening the knot. The cloth fell away, revealing a deep slice, old but angry at the edges. Likely a saber nick or jagged branch from her desperate flight. Boone crouched beside the fire, poured boiling water into a pan, and pressed a clean rag gently against the wound. The sting bit deep, but his touch was careful, practiced. Wachiwi studied his face, weathered lines, eyes carrying things unsaid. Clearly he had tended wounds before. "Keep it clean, and you'll mend," he said simply. She answered with a small nod, not trusting her voice. The day eased into a quiet rhythm. Boone tamped dirt around fence posts, while Wachiwi carried the heavy rails with effortless strength. Her power surprised him, though he only gave a faint, approving nod. She split firewood in measured strokes, then climbed the ridge to scan the horizon, instincts sharpened by weeks of pursuit. No riders, she reported when she returned. He accepted her word without a single question. Toward sundown, she watched him patch a broken stirrup leather, noting how he sometimes paused, one hand pressed to his knee. The limp was slight, but real. She understood such wounds, the kind a person never speaks of. When supper came, Boone filled her bowl first and kept a smaller portion for himself. Among her own people, men claimed the best share. His quiet courtesy left her searching his face for hidden motives. She found none. Night drew in with coyotes calling across the flats. Boone spread his bedroll on the porch again, though the ground would chill before dawn. Wachiwi lingered in the doorway, knees drawn up, watching him settle. "You don't ask questions?" she said at last, her voice low. "If you want me to know, you'll tell me," he replied, without turning. The words stayed with her as she lay on the bunk. She listened to the creak of wind through the fence and the slow, steady breathing from the porch. For the first time since the Red Hawk clan was scattered, she let herself imagine stopping if only for a while. Sleep came easier. The unease in her chest shifted into something different, a cautious trust, fragile, but alive. Boone had his reasons for living apart. She had hers for wandering. For now, fate had set them on the same patch of earth. Days blurred into a steady pattern. Boone rose before dawn to brew coffee and tackle whatever the land demanded. Wachiwi joined in without prompting, lifting what he could not, splitting logs faster than he could stack, keeping her watch on the empty horizon while he worked with tools. Their silence no longer felt like a wall, but a truce they both relied on. Still, supplies dwindled flour salt cartridges. One morning, Boone said simply, "We'll ride into town." The words struck deeper than they sounded. Would he keep her hidden? Fear what folks might say. His calm decision told her otherwise. Yet her chest tightened as she climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. The settlement ahead was little more than a string of weather-worn buildings, a store, a saloon with sagging shutters, a livery, a gray-painted church. As they rolled down the main street, talk died mid-sentence. She felt every glance before she saw them, men pausing, women drawing children close, half-swallowed whispers slicing the air. Wachiwi Sky sat tall, jaw set, eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to flinch beneath the weight of their stare. At the livery, 3 rough-looking hands lounged against the hitch rail hats, slouched low tobacco bulging their cheeks. One muttered something sharp enough to draw crooked grins from the others. Boone Carver kept the team steady and said nothing, reining the wagon to a halt in front of the general store. Wachiwi Sky felt her stomach tighten. That brand of laughter was all too familiar. Soldiers, settlers, even voices from her own Red Hawk clan had once mocked her size. She tried to let it slide off, but the sound cut deep. Inside the shop smelled of leather and old dust. Silas Knox, the storekeeper, let his eyes drift from Boone to the towering woman beside him and lingered a beat too long. From behind the counter, Nettie Brooks, thin and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. "Need women's clothes. Maybe a blouse." The question came wrapped in a pointed edge. "I don't need any." Wachiwi answered evenly, meeting her gaze. Nettie pressed her lips tight, but said no more. Boone quietly stacked flour salt and cartridge boxes on the counter, counting out coins with the same unshaken calm. As they stepped outside, a boy's jeer split the late afternoon air. "Giant squaw," the words were flung to wound. Boone stopped and turned just enough for his voice to carry low and cold. "Enough." The boy froze, eyes wide, and the street went still. Boone's quiet authority weighed heavier than any shout. On the wagon ride home, Wachiwi fixed her eyes on the horizon, fingers clamped on the seat. Gratitude and shame wrestled inside her. Boone had neither joined the laughter nor pretended not to hear. He had simply ended it. Still, the sting remained. Anger and weariness burned together until she finally asked, "Why don't you send me away?" "People look at me and you pay the price." Boone kept his eyes on the rutted trail reins steady. "I've lost enough already. What folks think doesn't weigh more than that." He left it there, and no more needed saying. Back at the shack, Wachiwi tied her water skin inside on a wall peg instead of leaving it outside where a stranger might snatch it. The small gesture carried the weight of a choice she meant to stay. She spoke no word of it, but felt the decision settle deep. That night she sat closer to the fire than before, so near the sleeve of Boone's shirt brushed her arm when he reached for the coffee pot. Neither moved away. The silence between them held a new meaning, quiet acknowledgement of unspoken decisions. The days after their town trip carried a different tension. Boone's eyes often swept the horizon as if he sensed trouble riding the wind. Wachiwi felt it too. Rumors in a small frontier town never stayed put. They rode faster than any horse. She wondered if federal marshals might hear of her, or bounty hunters, or even scouts from her scattered clan, none of whom might greet her kindly. The thought kept her senses' sharp ears tuned to every shift of breeze. One afternoon, walking a ridge above the homestead, she caught a glint of sunlight on metal far off. She dropped to a crouch and counted. 6 riders, their hats and gear marking them as soldiers. They rode slow, cutting across the far horizon without turning her way. Still, their presence pressed on her like a storm in the distance. She stayed low until they veered west and melted into heat shimmer. When she returned, Boone was fastening canvas windbreaks along the north wall. "Chest tight," she said simply. "Soldiers." He didn't ask where or how many. He just straightened, dusting his palms. "They won't bother with a place that looks like it isn't worth the trouble," he said, voice steady. Yet the careful preparations, she now noticed, told her he had already thought ahead. That quiet foresight steadied her more than his words. That evening, over beans thick with rabbit wachiwi, spoke more than usual. "My people were near the river weeks back, too close to the soldiers' path. Gunfire scattered us. Some fell, some ran. I walked east until I had no strength left." Her jaw tightened. "I don't know if any still live." Boone set down his spoon but didn't press. Firelight shadowed his face as he finally said, "You made it here." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Here, where even my own people called me too big, not shaped like a woman should be. Among them I was strange, among yours worse." Her strong hands that hauled fence rails like kindling, lay open on her knees. Heat of old shame and stubborn survival rose inside her. Boone leaned forward and added a log to the fire. After a long pause, he said quietly, "I've seen men break over far less. You're still standing." The plain words landed with a surprising weight. He wasn't offering comfort. He was recognizing her. For a long moment she held his steady gaze, then let the silence stand. When the fire burned low, Boone handed her an extra blanket. She hesitated, then folded it beside her instead of pulling it over her shoulders, a small compromise she could live with. Before lying down, she said softly, "Thank you, Boone." From his place near the door, hat tilted low, he answered without lifting his head, "You're safe here." Wachiwi lay back on the bunk, the blanket within reach. His words echoed through her chest like a slow, sure heartbeat, promising a safety she had almost forgotten existed. Safe. The word felt strange to Wachiwi Sky, a word that had never truly belonged to her. She turned on her side, listening to Boone Carver's breathing settle into a slow, even rhythm, and dared for one night to believe it might be real. In the days that followed, their life shaped itself into something new. They were no longer two strangers simply sharing ground. Workspace and small choices blended together without a word. It began with chores. When Boone turned his ankle in a hidden gopher hole and moved with a faint limp, Wachiwi stepped in without waiting to be asked. She lifted rails for the corral, steadied fence posts, while he hammered and hauled 2 water buckets at a time. Boone didn't protest. He watched, said nothing, and offered only a short nod, respect, not dependence. Inside the cabin, changes crept in as well. At first she had kept her pouch knife and few belongings near the door, ready to flee at a moment's notice. Now she placed them by the bunk. A quiet decision, Boone noticed, but never remarked on. For his part, he began making the morning fire for two without question, as if her presence was a given. Their silence no longer felt like a wall. It became a shared stillness, where both could lower their guard. Yet unanswered questions lingered. One cool evening, as beans simmered in the pot, Wachiwi finally asked what others might wonder. "You work hard. You keep this place alive. Why stay out here alone?" And Boone stirred the bean's jaw tightening. For a long moment she thought he would stay silent. At last he said quietly, "I had a wife. A boy. They were killed on the trail years back. After that, I stopped going where people expect you to smile." She let the silence stretch. No more needed saying. The loss in his voice explained the discipline she saw in him, and why he met her without judgment. Weeks later, when they returned to town, nothing had softened. Whispered comments began before they even stepped off the wagon. Two men leaning at the livery muttered crude jokes about Boone's giant woman. Heat flared in Wachiwi's chest. Shame mixed with the old sting of being treated as something less than human. She wanted to strike back, but Boone's calm steadiness anchored her. He handled the trading as if nothing was amiss, laying down coins for flour and tools. Nettie Brooks eyed Wachiwi again with the same thin-lipped disapproval. "You sure she don't need proper clothing?" she asked, voice sharp. "I need nothing from you," Wachiwi said coldly, before Boone could speak. Nettie drew back. Boone finished the purchase and turned away without a flicker of expression. Outside, a boy Cody Hart called after them with another taunt. This time Boone stopped, turned just enough for his voice to carry flat and final. "That's enough." The boy's grin vanished as he stepped back into silence. Boone hadn't raised his voice or lifted a hand yet. He ended the insult with quiet force. On the ride home, Wachiwi studied him. "Why let me stay?" she asked at last. "You know what people think, what they say." Boone kept his eyes on the trail reins steady. "Because I don't care what they think. And because you work same as I do. You're here because you choose to be. That's enough." It wasn't pity. It was a simple fact. For Wachiwi, that truth was something entirely new. Back at the homestead, she carried her water skin inside and tied it to the wall beam instead of leaving it by the door. That small act claimed the place as hers. That night, sitting beside the fire, Boone reached for the coffee pot. His sleeve brushed her arm. Neither moved away. The silence between them said more than any words. Before dawn, the first sign came. Wachiwi woke, with her stomach twisting hard, and rose quickly, crouching by the water barrel until the sickness passed. Cool air clung to her skin as sweat rolled along her temple. She rinsed her mouth, steadied her breath, and stepped outside. Boone was already at the fire, setting coffee to boil. He glanced at her pale face, but said nothing. She was grateful. The sickness returned the next morning and again the one after that. At first, she blamed bad water or too many beans. But then she noticed more. The smell of coffee, once tolerable, now turned her stomach. Rabbit meat tasted oddly sweet, and her body carried a new heaviness she couldn't dismiss. Her monthly bleeding never came. She counted the weeks, tracing back to those first quiet nights in Boone's cabin. The numbers confirmed what instinct had already whispered. Her chest tightened as she sat in the harsh daylight, knees drawn up, staring at her strong brown hands. Weeks earlier, soldiers had mocked the notion that any man would claim her as a woman. She had laughed bitterly at them. Now the truth settled inside her deeper than fear or shame, something no laughter could deny. She remembered how the prairie settlers had once sneered at the thought of her with Boone Carver, and she had laughed back harsh laughter meant to hide the hurt. But now the truth settled over Wachiwi Sky like a sudden storm. She was carrying a child. The realization struck hard. First came fear of the talk that would rise like dust when her belly showed, of cruel whispers and stares that would slice deeper than a knife. Then came shame, the same old shame she had known since girlhood, when the Red Hawk clan called her too big not woman enough, a walking curse. Yet threaded through that shame was something fiercer and harder to name wonder. Her body had defied every cruel word ever thrown at her. She didn't know how Boone would take the news. She had watched men abandon women for far less, and had no reason to believe this quiet cowboy would be different. The thought of carrying a child alone on a harsh frontier made her heart race. Still, she could not hide it. She found Boone at the corral, bent over a horse's hoof. Gripping the rail until her knuckles turned white, she forced the words out steady, though her chest burned. "I am with child." Boone looked up, face unreadable. He set the hoof down gently, rose to his full height, and studied her. Silence stretched long enough for doubt to cut deep. Then he nodded once. "We'll make room," he said, calm, the same tone he used for mending a fence or setting a water barrel. After a pause, he added, "I'm glad you told me." The quiet acceptance caught her off guard. She had braced for anger, disbelief, anything but this. Turning aside, she hid the tears that burned at the corners of her eyes. All that day she worked in silence, yet every glance at Boone found him unchanged. He neither avoided her nor treated her differently. That night, as they sat by the fire, he built a larger bed frame from scrap wood, carried a second water barrel inside, and stitched feed sacks for padding, wordless proof of his choice. Some might wonder how such a bond could grow so quickly. The answer lay in their slow, deliberate days' shared labor, long silences, heavy with meaning, and the raw fact that survival had tied them together. Nothing was rushed. When Wachiwi lay down, she placed a hand over her stomach. Fear and old shame still lived there, but now there was also a fragile spark of hope, more dangerous and powerful than any soldier. The weeks that followed pressed heavier than she admitted. Her body changed in ways no loose cloth could hide. Her breasts ached. Mornings brought relentless sickness, and she slept deeper than before. Shame returned, firstborn of memories that clung like burrs, laughter from soldiers, insults from strangers, and the taunts of her own people who had called her nature's mistake. She could almost hear those voices again when she imagined them seeing her belly swell with the child of a white man. Boone never spoke of shame or fear. He simply worked. He widened the bunk, padded it for comfort, and set another water barrel near the door in quiet readiness for the birth. Wachiwi watched in silence, torn between gratitude and disbelief. She had known men who turned their backs on their own children, yet Boone stayed. One evening, while the fire burned low, she finally let the worry surface. "They will call me cursed again," she said softly. "Maybe worse. They will never let me forget what I am." Boone poked the fire, his voice steady. "Let them talk. They don't live here. We do." His words didn't erase her fear, but they kept it from growing. Trust came not from grand promises, but from his unchanging ways. He rose at dawn, worked the land, and treated her not as a burden, but as his equal. Help arrived from an unexpected direction. One afternoon, Della Frost, a rancher's wife, rode in with a basket of eggs on her arm. Broad-shouldered and sure, she swung down from her horse and looked Boone and Wachiwi over without flinching. "You'll need help when the time comes," she said matter-of-factly. It wasn't a question or an insult. It was a promise. Wachiwi straightened ready for mockery, but Della only added, "I brought herbs for the sickness. You'll need cloth, too." For the first time since the Red Hawk clan scattered Wachiwi, felt another woman meet her without pity or ridicule, only recognition. "I will," she answered simply. Boone lifted a hand in thanks, and Della nodded before riding off into the dusk. That night, Wachiwi sat by the fire, turning the visit over in her mind. Acceptance had come from where she least expected it. Not her people, not a lifelong friend, but a white woman she barely knew. It stirred something deep, the sense that her life no longer belonged to what she had lost, but to what she was building here. When she lay down, she rested a hand on her stomach again. The child shifted a faint, living flutter under her palm. For the first time since fear had taken root, she let herself imagine more than survival, a future, a home for herself, Boone Carver, and the child soon to come. By midsummer, Wachiwi Sky's body showed every sign of the life growing inside her. No loose shirt or shawl could hide the gentle swell of her belly, and when she and Boone Carver drove back to town for supplies, the change was plain to all. The whispers that once hid in corners now followed them openly along the dusty street. A ranch hand spat near the pump and muttered about Boone keeping a savage giant. Another barked a laugh loud enough for the whole street to hear, joking that a child of theirs would be too tall to fit through any doorway. Heat flared in Wachiwi's chest, and her hands clenched tight. She half expected Boone to step forward to trade words or blows. Instead, he stood still, eyes fixed on the man's boots, and said nothing. The silence stretched until the mocker's grin cracked and faded. Uneasy, the man shifted aside without another word. Only then did Wachiwi grasp the weight of Boone's kind of strength. Quiet, immovable. Heavier than violence. Inside Silas Knox's store, Nettie Brooks avoided Wachiwi's gaze. Sliding a sack of flour across the counter, she said in a clipped voice, "That'll be a hard mouth to feed." "It will be strong," Wachiwi answered, steady and sure. Nettie found no reply. Boone counted the coins with care, jaw tight, and led Wachiwi out without a hitch. On the ride home, the air hung thick between them, until Wachiwi asked softly, "Do you regret it? Bringing me there? Standing beside me?" Boone kept his eyes on the road, hands easy on the reins. "No, I regret the things I didn't stay for. Not this." The quiet conviction of his words rippled through her like a stone dropped in still water. Back at the homestead, proof of change showed everywhere. Boone had worked a small garden near the wash, where rare rains pooled planting beans, and squash in the stubborn soil. Wachiwi knelt beside him, pressed her palm to the earth, and said, "This ground is not easy. Neither are we," he replied, and for the first time she smiled without bitterness. Listeners might wonder if their bond went deeper than shared chores and silence if Boone would stay for a lifetime. The answer came one hushed night. As the fire faded to red coals, Wachiwi said suddenly, "I do not want a preacher. Or papers. Those things mean nothing to me." Her voice was firm, but carried a trace of fear. Boone leaned back against the doorframe, thoughtful. "Then we'll make our own vows." He took a clean strip of leather from his saddlebag and tied it gently around her wrist, knotting it secure. He handed her another strip, and her large hands trembled slightly as she bound his wrist in turn. Firelight flickered over their joined shadows. No words were spoken. None were needed. The leather binding was stronger than any paper. The child moved within her as they sat there, and for the first time she felt claimed by choice, not by rumor or fate. Boone met her gaze across the fire. What passed between them was not the kind of romance the town gossips imagined, but a steady pact to remain, to share, to endure. Outside, coyotes called across the dark flats. Inside, silence and the crackle of flames sealed their vow. For Wachiwi, it was enough. Trouble came when the summer heat thickened, and not a breath of wind stirred. Boone was mending a rail at the corral Wachiwi, stacking firewood by the shack wall, when the sound of hooves drifted in 3 horses, steady and deliberate. Both of them looked up. Boone set his hammer aside, shoulders tightening, though his face stayed calm. 3 riders approached drifters by their dusty coats and low-pulled hats, revolvers worn shiny at the hip. One sported a bent old cavalry brim. They halted just outside the fence, grinned sharp, with the arrogance of men who think they own the ground beneath them. The leader spat into the dirt. "You're harboring a thief," he called. "Army pays good for a runaway squaw, pays more if she's carrying a half-breed." His words were meant to bite. Wachiwi's jaw locked. She felt the child shift inside, a fierce reminder of what was at stake. Boone stood at the fence, hands empty. "Turn around," he said, his tone as flat and steady as if naming the weather. The man laughed. "Or what? You'll stare us to death. You're nothing but a ranch hand living with something less than human." His hand brushed the butt of his rifle. Wachiwi moved first. In one swift stride, she loomed beside his horse, seizing the rifle barrel with both hands and twisting hard. The weapon wrenched sideways, and the rider lurched, nearly thrown. The second drifter spurred closer, reaching for his own gun, but Boone lunged low and drove a shoulder into the man's knee. The rider pitched from the saddle with a shout. The third hesitated, courage draining at the sight of Wachiwi, towering with a broken rifle stock in her grasp. "Go," Boone said, voice still, even though his chest rose and fell fast. The downed man cursed. The others pulled back. The leader steadied himself, but his glare could not hold. They wheeled their horses and rode off in a cloud of dust and angry shouts meant to cover retreat. When quiet returned, Boone sank onto the fence rail to catch his breath. Wachiwi stood with the snapped rifle in her hands, heart pounding. They shared a long, heavy silence. Both knew what it meant. Their life here had been marked. Soldiers, bounty hunters, drifters, they might come again, but neither spoke of leaving. Some might wonder why Boone hadn't drawn a gun, why he hadn't ended the threat outright. The answer lay in the way he carried himself afterward. Boone Carver was not a man eager for blood. He had lost enough to know killing never ends what follows. His choice was to stand firm, neither to run nor to turn his land into another graveyard. Wachiwi Sky understood and respected that resolve. She also knew it meant they must be ready when danger returned. That evening, as the fire burned low, her hand rested on the gentle curve of her stomach. The child shifted with strong, steady life. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "They will not stop." Boone Carver poured coffee, set the pot aside, and answered with the same calm that had carried him through every storm. "Then neither will we." The quiet certainty of his words sank deep. For the first time since fleeing the river, Wachiwi believed she would not face the next trial alone. Their bond had never been blessed by preacher or paper, but it had been tested in daylight against men who meant to break it, and it had held. Labor came in the gray hush before dawn. A sudden gripping pain woke Wachiwi and stole her breath. At first she thought it a passing cramp, but when the next wave struck, longer and harder, she knew. She rose slowly, pressing one hand to her belly. Boone was already awake, boots half-laced. Reading the look on her face, he set the boots aside. "It's time," he said. He had prepared for this day. A kettle waited to be boiled, clean cloths were stacked on a shelf, and a full water barrel stood by the door. He saddled a horse and rode hard to fetch Della Frost, the rancher's wife, who had promised her help. While Boone was gone, Wachiwi gripped the bunk's frame, breathing through each contraction. Memories of women from the Red Hawk clan, those who bled too long or birthed stillborn, flashed through her mind. Strength felt useless against such fate, and panic threatened to rise. But Della arrived swiftly calm and capable. "We'll do this standing or sitting," she said, voice firm but kind. "Hold when the pain comes, breathe when it passes." Wachiwi obeyed, planting her feet solid on the plank floor and clutching the frame until it groaned. Hours crawled by. Each surge of pain swept through her like a wave breaking over stone. Boone stayed close, offering a cool rag, letting her lean against his chest when the force of it nearly bent her. His silence steadied her more than words could. At last a sharp cry filled the room. Della lifted the newborn with practiced hands, cleaned and wrapped the infant. "A girl," she said, with a small, sure smile. Wachiwi drew the baby to her heart, skin to skin. Tiny fingers curled around her mother's hand, and for a long moment she could not speak. Shame, fear, and all the mocking voices she had carried seemed small and far away. What mattered now was the warm, breathing weight in her arms. Boone sat beside her on the bunk, the leather strip she had tied around his wrist weeks ago still in place. He touched the baby's back with rough, gentle fingers. "Welcome," he said. A plain word, yet it carried the weight of a prayer. In the weeks that followed, the prairie offered quiet answers to every doubt. Della rode back often with broth herbs and calm advice, never lingering, but always leaving help behind. Silas Knox, once quick to let Nettie speak sharp, now kept his eyes lowered and his tongue still when Boone paid for supplies. Young Cody Hart, who had once mocked Wachiwi, left a neat bundle of clean rags at the fence and slipped away without a word. Acceptance didn't arrive with cheers or handshakes. It came in silence, people choosing to look away rather than stir trouble. And in that silence, peace took root. Life at the homestead deepened. A calf dropped in the corral. The stubborn garden Boone had scratched into the hard soil pushed up green shoots. The shack, once a bare refuge, now held the soft cry of a baby at night, and Wachiwi's low song's music she hadn't sung since childhood floating into the rafters. One clear evening after the day's heat had eased, she sat on the porch steps with her daughter sleeping in the crook of her arm. Boone hammered a small charm of carved bone above the doorway. When he finished, he turned to her. Their eyes met, and nothing more was needed. Their bond was no longer fragile or in question. It had been tested, scarred, and finally sealed, not by church vows or legal papers, but by survival and their steadfast choice to remain. The land would always be harsh, the world outside still unkind, but their home stood. The three of them, man, woman, and child, sat together in the fading gold of evening. For the first time since either had known grief, the future no longer felt like something to fear. It was theirs, hard-won and enduring, a quiet peace no one could steal. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you